World War I ushered in a number of technological changes. Airplanes were first used in warfare. You have the introduction of tanks. And another somewhat lesser known introduction was that of the zipper. It was invented in 1917 right here in Akron, Ohio. It was originally used for military purposes like zipping up tents. There were also a number of social changes that came out of World War I, and one of them was greater rights for women. Just as women were entering the workforce, they were demonstrating in large numbers to get the vote, and in 1920 here in the United States, the 19th Amendment made that possible. This liberation for women was expressed not only in the ballot, but also in their way they dressed. There was dramatic changes in women's clothing in the 1920s. The skirts got shorter, and the silhouette went from being really constricted with tight corsets to being tubular. These changes also happened in the way clothing was constructed. Around 1920, women's dresses were closed with a series of hooks and eyes and snaps that went all around the bodice, and there were layers and layers of clothing. Even though the general silhouette was kind of tubular, the construction was still quite complicated. But during the course of the decade, there was a great simplification in the cut and the construction and the way they were fitted to the body. Instead of wrapping and being pieced around the body, the clothes had simple side seams and were just a basic tube that women could slip over their head. In simplifying the construction of the clothing, there was also a simplification in the production process. These clothes could be produced without being fitted to the body in such a complicated way, and thus women could go to the store and just buy their clothes off the rack instead of having a dressmaker fit them to the body. This enabled the widespread adoption of ready-to-wear in women's clothing. Along with changes in the cut and construction of clothing, there were changes in the aesthetics. There was the adoption of the Art Deco style. The metallic elements, machine aesthetic, and natural sinuous lines echoed the styles that were also popular in decorative arts. You can see the architecture and domestic objects that all reflected this similar aesthetic. The 1920s were a period of prosperity and wild parties, but this came to a rather abrupt end in October of 1929 when the stock market crashed. This ushered in the Great Depression, which was a period of material deprivation for many Americans. The fashions of this time changed and women's clothing became more fitted and the hemlines lengthened. These tighter dresses often opened along the side seam under the arm. And at first it was a series of snaps, but then by the end of the 1930s, you see the introduction of the zipper as a closure in women's clothing. During this period, movies represented an escape for many Americans. Sound was introduced into pictures in the late 1920s, and by the end of the 1930s, you even have color movies. There were a number of movie stars who became wildly popular during this period, and one of them was Katharine Hepburn. The Kent State University Museum has an extensive collection of Katharine Hepburn's movie costumes, as well as some of her personal wardrobe. The Great Depression came to an end as the United States entered World War II in 1941. This led to changes in women's dress as they entered the workforce in large numbers, adopting suits and even uniforms. There were other changes in fashion, both for men and women, as there were elements of rationing because of shortages in materials. Women's skirts had to be narrow, and men couldn't have cuffs on their pants or even double-breasted jackets. When World War II ended in 1945, there was a reaction against so many of the restrictions and shortages of the war years. Christian Dior in 1947 offered the new look, which offered women a full skirt and a tight waist. These styles in many ways harken back to an earlier era before so much of the liberation which had freed women's bodies from constraining corsets and long petticoats. As men returned from the front, women left their jobs and home life resumed. There was a sharp rise in the birth rate as the baby boom generation was born. The popularity of suburban life was reflected in new television shows that came and took advantage of the medium of television, which was growing in popularity. Shows such as Leave It to Beaver and I Love Lucy reflected this idealized home life.